6th level spells come at a point where characters are beginning the late game, just getting into tier 3 and hitting level 11. This is a point where not all that many players often get to during regular play. But it's also the point where the power level of the game is truly starting to spike higher than ever, and Magic is able to do some even more insane things. So today we are going to be continuing my quest of tier ranking every spell in the new player's handbook, and we're moving on to 6th level spells now. As a reminder, these lists are not about comparing to the 2014 versions. We are strictly looking forward. I may occasionally make reference to a change from 2014, but it's not going to impact the ranking. Secondly, and way more importantly, I've put the tier descriptions on screen. Please take a minute to read them and understand them, and know that just because something might appear in C or even D tier does not mean that it is a bad spell by any stretch. These lists that I make are primarily about the general applicability of spells and not how good or bad they might be in some very niche or hyper-specific multi-class combos, and it is not an optimizer's list either. I say it every time, but every spell can be god tier in the exact right moment, but that is just not the point of what I'm trying to get at here. So try and keep in mind what the definitions of each tier are. It's the only way this list is going to make any sense. Alright, that's enough of that, let's just get into it. Shout out to all my patrons and channel members, you guys rock, you truly mean the world to me. As usual, we're going to go through the list alphabetically. This video is sponsored by the Hall of Horrors by Echidna Design, which is live on Kickstarter now. This trove of goodies is compatible with 2024 Dungeons & Dragons, Daggerheart, and Candela Obscura, and contains over 60 new monsters including extensive lore on each creature, tons of custom artwork, over 40 new magic items, 120 encounter hooks, and an emporium of new mechanics to add into your games as well. So don't miss out, go back to the Hall of Horrors using my link in the description or the pinned comments below, and thank you again to Echidna Design for sponsoring this video. First up is Arcane Gate, which basically lets you create 2 linked portals that are within 500 feet of each other, one of which must be within 10 feet of you. You can hold them open for up to 10 minutes using your concentration, and basically anything that enters immediately pops out on the other side. It's kind of like that game Splitgate if you ever played that. Shout out to 2021. What a year. Anyway, the spell is cool. It's kind of like a better Dimension Door, which makes sense considering the spell is 2 levels higher. There are some useful opportunities for it to evacuate locations or even pull off some crazy shenanigans during combat if you are particularly committed. You would just need to be aware that it is taking your concentration. 500 feet isn't an insane distance, but it probably is sufficient to ensure relative safety. It's a good spell, with a very particular purpose. It's going in C tier. Next up is Blade Barrier, which is a bit of a weird one. It's essentially a wall spell, despite not being called one. You can create this enormous wall of blades that's up to 100 feet long or ring them with a 60-foot diameter. The walls deal a bit of damage when anything hits them, and it also creates some cover for anything inside them. There are a reasonable amount of ways that you can use the spell, from creating a more defensive position to making your own Thunderdome for some enemies, or even just to create separation. 60-10 force damage on a dex save for half isn't great for a 6th level spell. There isn't much of another way to put it. But with some creativity and help from party members, you can still make a few things work with that too. It's enough to put it in B tier. Moving on to Chain Lightning, this is a spell that I have always loved because the flavor of it to me is just so cool. It's just unfortunate that the execution of the spell is not as great as I would like it to be. The biggest issue that Chain Lightning has is that each target must be within 30 feet of the original target, which, depending on the size and shape of the battlefield, could be difficult to make effectively work. If each target could be within 30 feet of each other and you could split off the chain from any of the creatures, it would be significantly better. On the other hand, the big advantage that it has is that it is still a multi-target spell where you don't need to worry about friendly fire or very specific positioning like you would with something like a fireball. I think Chain Lightning will just narrowly make its way into B tier. I strongly considered C, but I think it has enough going for it to nudge it up 1 rank. Our next spell is Circle of Death, and I think this one is a bit misleading at first. When you initially look at it, it's hard not to be wowed by the 150-foot range and the ludicrous 60-foot radius sphere that it creates. But, as it turns out, that enormous blast radius ends up being the thing that actually holds the spell back. Incidentally, Circle of Death has the exact opposite problem as Chain Lightning, in that this becomes so difficult to use during combat because of how insanely large the radius is, and the fact that it just hits everything. It's not selected targets within the range. So managing to get a bunch of enemy creatures within range and not hitting any allies is probably going to be a challenge. But even if you do, it's only hitting for 8d8 necrotic on a constitution save for half. Just keep in mind that Fireball is dealing 8d6 and it's 3 spell levels lower. Yes, it does have a much smaller radius, but honestly, that is probably a benefit in a lot of cases. Constitution is also among the worst saves in the game to target at every tier of play. In most cases, there are going to be far cheaper and more efficient blast spells out there to cast, to the point that Circle of Death is just rarely worth picking. That said, it can definitely be cool of hell if there's a horde of like 100 undead charging toward you and you want to feel like an absolute god. But outside of that, it's probably more of a liability than anything else. Circle of Death is going in D tier. Next up is Conjure Fey, and this has always stuck out as such a weird spell to me since the release of the new player's handbook. With all the talk about how insane and busted Conjure Minor Elementals and Woodland Beings are, this spell seems like it was designed by completely different people. This spell requires a 6th level slot, your concentration, your action, and a successful attack to be made in order to do anything. And even then, it's just doing 3d12 plus your spellcasting modifier. We're looking at like low to mid 20s for average damage for your 6th level spell slot with a single attack. It's brutal. Really, what you're paying for here is the auto application of the Frightened condition, which admittedly is good, but I'm nowhere near convinced enough that it is worth the cost and hoops to get it, when if you're looking to frighten or otherwise knock out some creatures, there are far cheaper spells to do this for you. The fact that you can move it and attack with it as a bonus action on subsequent turns is nice, but there's almost always going to be something better that you can be doing with your concentration during this time. I think the craziest part is that the most redeeming element of the spell was that when it was upcast, it was at 2d12 per spell level above 6, but in the most recent errata, they nerfed it down to 1d12. I don't understand. This is a bad spell, and it's going in F tier. Contingency is such a cool spell to make sure that you have exactly the tool that you need when you need it most. The way that it works is that in the process of casting the spell, you get to choose another spell of level 5 or lower and cast it at the same time and designate a trigger for when it takes effect. The spell slots of both spells are consumed immediately upon casting Contingency, and the spells last for 10 days. This can allow you to take advantage of some downtime to precast a spell that you might need without needing to feel the pain of the additional burn spell slots. Because you can define the trigger, it creates some incredibly versatile options that you can use in a wide variety of situations. Things like Invisibility, Mirror Image, Dimension Door, Haste, or Polymorph all make for fantastic uses of the spell that can help you out regardless of whether you're in combat, exploration, or even some social situations. Contingency is an excellent spell, with its biggest issue really just being that it is best cast during an extended period of downtime, or at the very least, just prior to a rest, provided that you have the requisite spell slots. It's going in A tier. Next is Create Undead, and this is a spell that has a bit of upkeep. I'm not all that confident that straight up casting this is really worth it for a 6th level slot. Getting 3 CR1 creatures for that price is a bit steep. This means that the best way to make use of this is with an unspent 6th level or higher spell slot just before a long rest, since the creatures last for 24 hours. So if you have one available, this can be a good way to use it. It functionally means that you're walking into the next day with what amounts to 2 6th level spell slots. The thing is though, the spell really just boils down to a law of averages kind of thing. The creatures that you're generating with the 6th level version are CR1 ghouls. You're at least level 11 when you get this spell. And these ghouls have a +4 to hit, 12 AC, and 22 hit points. So they're probably not hitting, and if they get hit, they're instantly dying, no questions asked. But like I said, it's kind of just a numbers game. If you have enough of them, and by reasserting control daily and using it with higher spell slots, you will eventually deal some damage, cause someone the poisoned or paralyzed condition or something else. But also, there's plenty of cheaper spells that can accomplish the same thing without being a constant tax on high level spell slots. Casting at higher levels to get whites though is kinda nice. Obviously, the spell is better if you are a Necromancer wizard, but that is not in the new PHB, and it is not even available outside of Unearthed Arcana at the time of writing, so it is out of scope for this video. I'm going to put the spell in B. I don't think it's anything to write home about, but I'm sure that there are ways to absolutely break it that I'm just not aware of. I'm also generally just not a fan of minion style play, though that's more of a me thing. Either way, I think B is a reasonable ranking for the spell. Next up is Disintegrate. This is a super flashy spell and is so fun to see as a new player when you just look at that +40 sitting there. It's just so cool. In reality though, the spell isn't particularly good. A 6th level spell for single target damage is just not a good rate. The real thing that punishes Disintegrate though, is that it isn't even a save for half spell. If the target saves, you deal nothing, which is a massive bummer. The flip side of that being its best perk is that it does break walls of force, so I mean, there is that. Regardless, I still think Disintegrate is sadly going to fall into D tier. Moving on to Drawmij's instant summons, this is a spell that has such niche applications. There's certainly going to be some cases where it's useful, but requiring the object to be teleported to be 10 pounds or less is already pretty restrictive. That said, it can be good in some very specific, you need to bring X thing to Y location kind of quest, and you don't actually want to risk that thing at all. But again, that's still reasonably niche since the item that you're doing this with still needs to be pretty light. The other biggest downside for the spell though is that its material component, the 1000 gold sapphire, is destroyed when you teleport the item, which I think this puts over the top into nearly unusable outside of some niche applications where it will work incredibly well. So for that reason, it's going in D tier. Next is Eyebite, and I think this is actually a deceptively good spell. Single target spells, especially ones that require your concentration, are generally not looked upon favorably. But this one is technically not single target since you can affect multiple creatures, it just takes a few turns. The real power of the spell though comes from the fact that there is no repeated save. You can opt to knock a creature unconscious, frighten them, or poison them, and provided that they fail that initial wisdom saving throw and you maintain your concentration, you can just impact multiple targets or continue to cast other spells. I think Eyebite is a lot better than it might initially appear. I'm gonna drop it in B tier. Moving on to Find the Path, this is just your definitive C tier spell. It does exactly what it says it does and nothing else. There's not a lot of creativity involved, and wanting or needing to know where something is or how to get there is a fairly common campaign trope. It does require your concentration, which is kinda lame if you do end up getting in an unexpected encounter though. The spell is fine, it has fairly consistent and defined use cases, and does exactly what it's supposed to do. It's C tier. Moving on to Flesh to Stone, this is just such a bad spell. The target needs to fail a Constitution saving throw, and if they do, they're restrained. Then they need to fail another Constitution saving throw, and if they do, then nothing happens. Then they need to fail another Constitution saving throw, and if they do, then they're petrified. It's highly unlikely that you'll end up having them petrified during an encounter, especially since if they save 3 times, they succeed. What the spell functionally ends up being is a 6th level slot to restrain a target, which is absolutely not worth it. This is an F tier spell. Next up is Forbiddance, which is a pretty cool spell for a particular type of campaign where either you have a home base situation or you're trying to defend a city from some kind of creatures or invasion. Being able to define a fairly massive 40,000 square foot range to be able to protect against teleportation or other forms of planar travel is kind of niche, but also it's exactly the kind of thing that starts happening with increasing frequency as games get to higher levels, so it does make sense. The fact that we can damage them too pretty consistently is nice. It's a C tier spell, but it will be great in its intended scenario. Also, it would be so sad to have some random mage walk up on day 31 and just cast a spell magic on it. Moving on to Globe of Invulnerability, which is a spell that sounds amazing on a first read. And I mean, in fairness, it is a good spell, it's just not as spectacular as you might initially think. Being able to fully block spells of 5th level or lower is obviously very strong. The 2 big notes about the spell are that it does require your concentration, which I will fully acknowledge does make sense. But it still is something that is hampering the spell slightly. But I think the bigger thing that's working against it is the revamped monster design with the new monster manual. Since so many effects that used to be spells are now just actions and therefore would bypass the globe entirely, since it's not blocking magical effects, but specifically spells of 5th level or lower. Overall, I think it's still just good enough for B tier though. Guards and Wards is a spell. I mean, this is a very clearly intended as what most people would be considered to be a DM spell. There are very few situations where a player would want to cast this. That said, if you're playing with the 2024 rules and are using the Bastions feature from the Dungeon Master's Guide, then sure, I guess there's probably something there. I think in general, as a player, this is an F tier spell. If you happen to be using Bastions, maybe it's D tier. Harm is next, and you can probably guess where this is going to end up. It's a single target spell that doesn't deal a whole lot of damage. 14d6, save for half, is just not a great rate for your 6th level slot. Especially when that save being targeted is Constitution, which again is among the worst saves to target at all tiers of play. If the target does save, which they probably will, it's like mid-20s worth of damage. Yes, it does come with the upside of lowering the hit point maximum of the target, but healing outside of creatures that passively regenerate is not extremely common. This is a D tier spell. Next up is Heal, and this spell suffers from a lot of the same issues that most healing effects do in 5th edition. The fact that it's healing. In seriousness, it's just the same common complaint of it's much harder to out-heal incoming damage, and you're just as effective at 1 hit point as you are at 100, so it's really not all that useful. That said, heal does have a place. It's 70 hit points, which is a solid amount, but it can also instantly cure 3 conditions on a target at the same time. I think heal is just narrowly going to make it into B tier, but it's just on the cusp of C. Next up is an absolute classic, Hero's Feast. This is an excellent spell that has absolutely ravaged the market for gem-encrusted bowls across the multiverse. Being able to give 12 people resistance to poison damage, an incredibly commonly dealt type, and immunity to both the frightened and the poison conditions, as well as a bump to their hit point maximum, meaning that they can heal back to it all for 24 hours, is very strong. Provided you can access the material component, which is consumed in the casting, there's no question. This is an S tier spell. Moving on to Magic Jar, this is a spell that seems fairly complicated at first glance when you get hit with that massive wall of text. And it kind of is. Essentially, when you cast the spell, your body falls into a catatonic state, and your soul enters the container used as the spell's material component. Then, while in the container, you can project your soul within 100 feet of it to either go back to your body or to possess another humanoid, gaining control of their body and senses on a failed charisma saving throw. This has tons of applications in social scenarios, exploration, or honestly, even combat. The big thing to be aware of is that if the creature dies while you are possessing it, you need to make a charisma save against your own spell save DC, and if you fail, you die. Similarly, if the container is destroyed and your body is more than 100 feet away from where the container was, you also immediately die. So those are 2 things to seriously consider when using the spell, and is basically the only thing keeping it from being S tier. But otherwise, being able to flawlessly, not just impersonate, but actually become someone else while they can't do anything is absurdly powerful in a wide variety of situations. This is easily an A tier spell. I'm not sure how much needs to be said about Mass Suggestion. It's an incredibly powerful spell to end combat scenarios, convince people to let you through a gate or into some otherwise prohibited location, or to massively change the course of action of an entire group. The low bar of the suggestion just needing to sound achievable makes the potential power of this spell truly incredible and makes it easily an S tier spell. I don't have a whole lot to say about Move Earth either, but just for way less of a good reason. The spell is just very expensive for what it does. I will certainly concede that there are absolutely applications for this spell in problem solving or some other exploration scenarios too, but for the most part, the effect is too narrow and too slow to be worth picking in most cases. Because it can only target dirt, sand, or clay, and if you're navigating a work stone dungeon or something else of that nature, you're not going to be able to accomplish anything with the spell. While there certainly are some fair uses for this, they are few and far between. This is going in D tier. Next is Otiluke's Freezing Sphere, and this is a pretty good spell, less because of its baseline effects, but more because of the other stuff that it also provides. In a lot of ways, this looks like Circle of Death, which I dropped in D tier, but it does have some key differences. Admittedly, 10d6 damage is not exceptional for this level, but it does have that same insane 60-foot radius sphere that it can hit, but it also has a ridiculous 300-foot range. Which means that if you're out in the open, you can do a lot of work with the spell well before anything ever gets even close to you. On top of that, if you end up in a scenario where you are near water, you can freeze both the water and any creatures at the surface, and that is not tied to a saving throw, which is pretty great. The thing that really makes this spell though, is the fact that you can cast it and not have it go off immediately. You can instead turn it into a pellet to be either thrown or launched from a sling and then explode for its normal effect. This can be given to another party member in advance, granted only up to a minute, but it's still a nice option to open up AoE for multiple allies. I really considered putting this at A tier, but I still think the risk of hitting allies in a general situation is a bit too high and the damage is a little bit too low, which is going to knock it down into B tier, but it's a good spell. From the surprisingly good to the disappointingly bad, next we have Otto's Irresistible Dance. This lets us target one creature with a wisdom saving throw. If they succeed on the save, they spend their turn dancing comically in place. That's it. If they fail, they then have the charm condition, and while charmed, they also need to use all of their movement to dance comically in place, but they also have disadvantage on dexterity saving throws and attack rolls that are against them are made at advantage. On its turn, it can use its action to collect itself, ending the spell on itself on a success. This spell raises a lot of questions. Firstly, if they succeed on the initial save and have to dance comically, can they still attack during that period? We have been told countless times by the design team that spells do what they say, and this does not say otherwise. This is further corroborated by the fact that the text for failing the save uses identical language. It must dance comically and use all of its movement to dance in place, but then it goes on to say that when it makes attacks, they're at disadvantage. This implies that for the initial save, if they succeed, they can still attack and do so without disadvantage. It's just a straight attack. I will say though that it feels like the implication is that they are not supposed to be able to do this, but it's not clear. Secondly, a creature immune to the charm condition, of which there are 97 in the new monster manual across all creature types and CRs, is actually better off failing the save, which is pretty hilarious. Also, if a creature succeeds on subsequent saves, when is the movement spent? If they collect themselves right away, do they still have their movement left if they succeed? Either way, it's not an end of turn effect, so they would still have their bonus action available. Ultimately, there's just so many moving parts, so many failure points, and it's really expensive for something that you can get like 90% of the way with a first level Tasha's Hideous Laughter. This is an F tier spell. Next is Planar Ally, and this legitimately has the potential to be one of the most powerful spells in the entire game. You essentially get to ask an otherworldly entity for assistance with a particular task, and that entity then sends a representative to do that thing. The thing is that there is no guarantee that they will help, and you do need to come to an agreement on price. Provided that you have the funds, you can probably get away with asking for just about anything, particularly if you asked a good aligned entity for help. While this is a 6th level spell, and it is fairly expensive, I honestly don't think it's high enough considering that this can do just about anything and not pose much if any risk to you in most situations. The spell is essentially being balanced by the potentially ludicrous gold cost, which I don't think is an optimal way to do it, but here we are. In any case, Planar Ally simply can't go anywhere but S tier, since the ceiling on this one is quite literally through the astral plane. Next up is Programmed Illusion, and if you've been watching this series, you will probably know that I am a big fan of illusion spells since they offer so much potential for creativity for a player, and the situations where you can use them are often only as limited as what you can think of, which is just so fun. Programmed Illusion though, I'm a bit lukewarm on. A 6th level spell is just expensive for an illusion that still just immediately fails to any physical inspection. Now, you can do some pretty insane and wacky things if you stack these up over multiple days since they last until they're dispelled, but I think it's still just going to have some relatively niche applications, so it's going in C tier. Next up is Summon Fiend, which allows us to summon a demon, devil, or Yugoloth to our side for up to 1 hour at the expense of our concentration. What you decide to summon will change some of the things on the stat block. They all have a base AC of 18, which isn't awful. Demons get 50 hit points, Yugoloths get 60, and devils get a paltry 40 hit points. All of their ability modifiers are pretty bad too. Their best saves are dexterity and charisma, which is only at a +3, so thank goodness that these things have magic resistance because they're probably failing every save at this level. Devils get a fly speed, so I mean, that's neat. Resistance to fire and immunity to poison is nice, but still doesn't really compensate for the otherwise very poor defensive stats. The attacks though are at least pretty good. Assuming that we're casting at a 6th level, we're looking at 3d12 plus 27, 3d8 plus 27, and 66 plus 27, all of which are using our own spell attack modifier to hit. And yeah, we get a few extra hit points if we upcast, but if we do want an extra attack, you gotta juice this thing all the way up to level 8. Ultimately, this spell is going to fall into C tier, but probably just on the cusp of B. It does have some good attacks and some other reasonable abilities, but its low defenses mean that it will probably not survive many, if not more than one AoE attack that just happens to land. There is a chance that it could soak some damage from some single target stuff, but that doesn't seem as likely. Moving on, we have Sunbeam. This spell is particularly good if we are facing off against something with sunlight sensitivity or hypersensitivity like vampires and a few other creatures. But otherwise, this is almost certainly not something that you're going to want to take. A line spell dealing 68 radiant damage tied to a constitution saving throw, saving for half, is just almost never going to be worth it outside of, like I said, if you know that you are specifically facing creatures that are vulnerable to sunlight. The application of the blinded condition is nice, as is the extra light that it sheds, but it's not going to be pulling this any higher than D tier. Next is Tasha's Bubble and Cauldron, and I think that this is such a fun spell. If you're a prepper, this one is definitely for you. With it, we can create a number of common or uncommon potions equal to our spellcasting ability modifier as a bonus action per day. So how good this is really depends on what is available. So here's what we can pull. A potion of animal friendship, climbing, comprehension, fire breath, hill giant strength, growth, regular or greater healing, poison, pugilism, resistance, and water breathing. I think there's a strong variety and quality in there to be worth it. There are so many different scenarios that can benefit from having access to these potions. This is definitely an A tier spell. Transport via plants is a fun spell that you can use for navigating incredibly long distances incredibly quickly, or even in some very niche cases you can probably pull off some crazy movement shenanigans during combat, but that's probably not going to work out that often in reality. It's a solid spell that does what it says without any fuss. It's C tier. True Seeing is next, and while this is definitely a reasonable effect, the thing is that it's just a very expensive spell for what it does. If you absolutely know that it is something that will definitively be beneficial to you, then it can be worth prepping and casting. But in most cases, you probably won't need this, or you can get away with lower level spells like See Invisibility, which admittedly obviously do not do the same thing. This is going to be a C tier spell as well. Next is Wall of Ice, and this is a spell that I don't really understand. If we want to cast a wall spell, we have way better options at level 5 with either Wall of Force or Wall of Stone. The only upside to casting Wall of Ice is that I can deal a bit of damage, but I don't think that this is even close to a reasonable enough justification for this spell. Use the better wall spells at lower levels and save your higher level spell slots for something better. This is D tier. Moving on to Wall of Thorns, we have another wall spell that can deal some damage, but the thing about this wall spell is that I don't think it's actually that much of a wall spell. That said, it's one that can certainly be used to close some stuff off or create some enclosed spaces. But I think the power here really comes from being able to combine it with some other push abilities or restraining effects to shove creatures through and hold them in there and deal a ton of damage to it. So it's probably going to require the assistance of another party member, but it can definitely be potent if you pull it off well. Plus, it does double as kind of a wall, so I will actually put this up to B tier. There isn't much to say about Windwalk. It's a great transportation spell to be able to move across long distances without being seen, and to provide some relative safety to a large number of people simultaneously. It lasts for a long time, and you can go back and forth with it, though with a small delay. It's a C tier spell. And finally, we have Word of Recall. This spell lets you define a sanctuary, and then at some point in the future, lets you select up to 5 other willing creatures to instantly teleport back to that location. The biggest downside of the spell is that in order to designate an area as your sanctuary, you do first need to cast the spell there. So this will probably be done during a period of downtime. The biggest upside is that there is no range or even planar restrictions, so you can get real far real fast if you need to make a speedy escape. Or if, say, you had designated a sanctuary in a castle that is now overrun by some enemies, this is a great way to get instantly in. It's going in B tier. So that's it, that is my tier ranking of every 6th level spell in the 2024 Player's Handbook. Like always, even numbered spells are always a bit weird, and pretty much every time I do this, someone tells me that I get one of these horribly wrong. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Check out some of my other videos, but otherwise, take care.